This is Ndtv, and you're watching Classics.
Hello and welcome to the Unstoppable Indians. Every week we take a journey into the life of an outstanding Indian, a person whose talent, acumen or moral example is transforming India. The best, the finest from every field join me, Manvi Dhillon, on this show to share their life story, their journey to success, some of the knocks along the way, what made them get up and keep going, what makes them an unstoppable Indian. My guest today is India's most effective environment activist. Delhi has a public transport system run on clean fuel because of her. Indians are conscious of pesticide in their water and of course their cola because of her. She heads the Center for Science and Environment, a think tank that studies the effects of climate change, monitors air pollution and helps and encourages and works with business and people towards greener practices. Sunita Narain, thank you for joining me on the Unstoppable Indians. You know, you have this ability to focus public attention on an issue that really needs attention. And I'm going to ask you a simplistic question. What is the most pressing environmental concern for India right now?
Two. I think one, water. Be very clear. I'm very worried when I look at the scenarios for the future. I mean, we are really in a situation where we will need more water because we will industrialize, we will urbanize. And as we use clean water, we will generate more and more sewage. And we just do not have the capacity and will not have the capacity to clean up our excreta, which means that it will pollute our rivers, pollute our groundwater and become a health burden. Now for the rich, we will switch to bottled water and pretend that we don't live in an India which is drowning in its own excreta. But the fact of the matter is that that's going to be the biggest health burden for India and we just don't know how to get out of it. So water and increasing water scarcities is going to be one. And the second is the whole air pollution and the whole toxification agenda that we are dealing with. You know, we are seeing in our cities today more and more that we cannot breathe. We just cannot breathe. I mean, something like clean air is going to become so important. None of us would have even thought about it. But we are not understanding again that we need to do so much more to clean up our air and that it will deal with our own lifestyles and our own choices.
You know, how do you make it personal? And on a scale of 1 to 10, we as Indians, do we take environment protection personally yet? How personally do we take it, or are we oblivious? And I'm not including the rich here, I'm talking about the entire population.
Manvi, that's a very good question, and if I could, I'd divide it into two groups. I think the poor of India take it very personally. They take it very personally for the fact that they live on the environment. The environment is their survival. I mean, they get their water not from a tap that you turn on. They get it from the groundwater or the river. If it's polluted, it hurts them. If the forest disappears, it hurts them because they do not get firewood, they do not get fodder, they do not get building material. If the land degrades, it hits them. It hits their livelihood, it hits their life. So as I can see it, the poor in India today are environmentalists. They're actually your real environmentalists. You and I, we talk about environment. But the problem that we also have is that even as we get concerned about environment, we leave the action of it to government to do. And the policy therefore that has to come, which will get us onto a bus rather than a car, is something that we are still waiting for government. And governments, as you know,
function at their own pace
it's
with
not
their
just
own
their own
jerks.
pace, it's a tough one. And therefore we are taking advantage of the fact that it's going to be very tough to bring that transition. So we might as well talk about environment, but do very little about it.
But you know, fear works for us. And perhaps everyone living in a big city in India this winter, Delhi in particular, you know, every time they breathe, they know there's something wrong with the air. Do you think as an environmental activist that fear is an effective tool?
I think fear has to be, because it's not a fear which is about the supernatural. It's a fear about your own body, the impact on your own body. I mean, just understand, when you breathe the toxins in the air, and these are toxins in the air, there's enough evidence that they cause mortality, which means death, and they definitely cause morbidity, which is bad health. There's enough evidence that these small particulates enter through your bloodstream now to even cause a heart attack. I mean, there's enough evidence about the carcinogenicity of this. There's enough evidence to say that we should stop it. The problem again is, you take a city like Delhi, We did this huge effort. I think people in Delhi cared about the air. We brought in the transition to CNG. But then in the last 5 years, the car population has exploded. Okay? You're adding 1,000 new vehicles on the roads of Delhi. You're not a rich country that you can get rid of the old. So you want to emulate the examples of the rich without really being a rich country. So you have this huge problem today that your city is choked, it's jammed, it's congested, and it's polluted. And the only big answer that you have today, and it's really a big answer, is to reinvent mobility. But what does that mean in real terms?
You're telling me to get onto a bus.
I'm telling you to get onto a bus.
And 100,000 other people like us. And you know, that's a tough decision to take, but that's what it's going to take. Get onto a bus and look at the impact. If 100,000 or 500,000 of us were to do that.
Manvi, just think about it. In most of our cities today, the cars still commute less than 10% of the people. In Delhi, around 15% of the people, but the roads are jammed. Okay? Now, if you just thought about that logic and you said 100% had to move on those cars, where would you build? I mean, you should just forget your cities. You just should have roads and flyovers and double-decker, triple-decker flyovers. Now, the problem is, and I think urban Indians would be prepared to get onto a bus or a metro, and that's where the issue is. One, our own willingness to demand that change, and two, for government to be able to think that big, because at the end of the day, it's an out-of-box solution. The in-box solution has been, have a car industry, jam your roads with cars. Okay? The out-of-box solution is, think differently about mobility, do a massive investment in buses. This is the time when the whole world is talking about a financial recession and a need for public infrastructure. This is the time when we should be just going out and saying, Mr. Tata, Mr. Leyland, don't close down your factories because you have layoffs right now. We will give you the world's biggest bus order. Build our air-conditioned buses, build us low-floor buses, build us buses so that our cities reinvent mobility. Here is a green business, an answer to the financial recession and a way to rebuild your cities. But do you think anyone is going to think like that? Only mad people like me.
But you're persuasive. And you know, that's what I'm going to ask you. There are so many priorities. I mean, you've coined 2 of them, but even that breaks down into so many action steps. Where does the CSC, it's a 100-member team at the end of the day, small but formidable. Where does it find the clarity to direct energy on the next step, the next project, the next initiative, the next change?
You know, to be very frank, Manvi, we have actually not moved enormously. What we have found is that if you want to make change, you have to stay with an issue. And as CSC, we've actually stayed quite firmly with an issue. A lot of people ask me, so what are you doing? What's new? I say, well, I'm working on air pollution. But you've been working on air pollution for the last 10 years. But it's true, we have to stay with an issue. And I think where an institution like CSC has to remain focused and effective is that we have to stay engaged with public discourse, we have to move public discourse, and we have to keep challenging society to look for new answers. And that's a tough one because it does bring us huge amount of criticism. I mean, every time I know we started a campaign, I mean, I really have developed a thick skin after a while because it hurts at times. The amount of, the first response you get is, it's impossible, it's stupid, it's asinine. Only you could have thought of something like this. But then you stay with it, and you have to stay with it because you have to believe in it.
When you look back at the pesticide in cola sort of campaign, sure, it dented 2 of the glossiest brands in the world. When you look back and say, okay, so did I take it to its logical end, or is that logical end still being pursued? What's your thought?
It's being pursued. We are very clear. We haven't left it for a moment. It's not in the public gaze because it's not a story in today's world, but it is our focus. What was our objective when we did colas? 3 things. 1, we wanted to tell people in India that even something like colas, which you thought was safe, are unsafe, which really meant that we were saying that we want to have controls over pesticides. Okay? What did that result in? Very tough regulations from government on how to register pesticides. It resulted in new definitions on what pesticides would be registered, and a lot of old pesticides were deregistered. We stay focused on that by filing an RTI every 3 months to check on which pesticides are being registered and if the process is being followed or not. Second purpose of ours was to say food safety is a very big issue, because we are concerned about colas because we should be concerned about food and nutrition safety. Now clearly, with obesity growing in India, diabetes growing in India, and toxicity growing, it's something that we remain focused on. We now have a food safety authority, but I would not be proud to say that it is work done. It's work in progress, because we now have to insist with government that the vigilance on food safety remains. But the third agenda for us was to set standards for the colas itself, because if you remember, when we did our study, we never said we are against colas, but we said we want quality standards for colas. And we also said that there are no standards in the entire world. We want India to set them. It's been now 2.5 years since our last study. The last RTI that we filed in the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Consumer Affairs told us that the draft standard has now been made. The draft standard has been put up for public scrutiny. That public scrutiny process has been over on the 1st of October. We filed a next RTI to find out what has happened after the public scrutiny process, but I am absolutely sure that as much as they will try not to make the standards, we will insist that the standards are made. So we remain focused.